Hello and welcome to Level 3 Health and Social Care, Unit 302, the Communication Unit. And we're moving into week 2 now. In week 1, we talked a bit about verbal and non-verbal communication and the processes involved. And today we're going to really think about written communication. And this session really is going to focus on your written communication in your role as a care worker. Okay, so we're focusing on your care work. So it's called the Principles of Good Recording, and hopefully it guides you through what to do when you're recording information that you gather from your service users and create care plans, etc., etc. Okay. So let's start by thinking when you're picking up someone's charts, and you may already have seen some acronyms that you don't understand, and something like this, you might just see noted the principal was LTB, the patient was LTBB, and you think, what on earth does that mean? What can that be? And it means lucky to be breathing. It's the sort of thing that people used to write now and then. It's not really appropriate. It's not standard abbreviation. It's not approved abbreviation. But it just gives you sort of an idea of what happens when you start creating your own abbreviations, or sometimes you have them sort of within the care home. They get to be your own little sort of secret abbreviations. Um, but that's all very well and good. But if you're a new agency member of staff, or just a new member of staff, or someone from the multidisciplinary team who comes in from outside, you won't know what that means. And more importantly, it's really important that from the day you start writing in people's records, that you get very clear in your head that anything you write is a legal document, and it can be used in a court of law. So if you write sort of silly things like lucky to be breathing, that could get read out by a judge, and he might say to you, what on earth, what on earth are you doing here? And are you really the professional that you're trying to say that you are? So, I cannot emphasize enough to be conscious of what you write and the way that you write it. I mean, we're all lucky to be breathing, but we won't write it. Has it happened? Yes, it has happened, and that's where I got it from. And it was a mystery because the person who'd written it wasn't around and nobody knew what they were on about. And as I said, nobody really felt like they wanted to go and explain that one in a court of law. So let's think about the records kept in health and social care. Those of you who have already done some placement in a care home, you may be able to reflect on it. Those of you who maybe have just been reading about care homes and your placements or domiciliary care, just see if you can jot down some ideas. So take a few minutes before we move on to the next slide to jot down some ideas of the sort of records that are kept in health and social care. I mean, you might not remember everything, but just jot down some of the things that come to your mind. If I say to you, what are the health and social care records? What are the records that you use in your care home? What are the records that you use in your domiciliary care service, if that's what you do, or your clinic? I know some of you work in clinics. What are sort of records are you using? A lot of the records will be the same. Some of your homes may or places of work may have some very specific records that just relate to them. That's fine. But generally, there are a lot of ones that are the same. So just jot down, take a moment to jot down some ideas, and we'll pick it up in a later slide. You can move on when you're ready. So documentation, generally, overall, it provides written evidence of the interactions, the treatments, the procedures, and how the patient has responded to them, whether it's well or not so well. It also provides your communication with other healthcare providers. If a physiotherapist has come in or a psychologist has come in to the unit to do a piece of work with the service user, that needs to be documented so everybody knows what's happened. There is also a presumption about documentation that a medical record is accurate if no evidence of fraud or tampering is noted. And that's really important. So, like I said, it can be used in a court of law, and if there's no sign that it's been tampered with, then it's assumed to be an accurate record because that's all it can be, really. So what you've written is assumed to be true. So you have to make sure you don't make any mistakes. Okay. Medical records that are intact, sequential, and organized supports a presumption of quality care. So there is a general feeling, say, like when CQC come in to do an inspection and they see good, well organized medical records that are all tidy, not having got bits missing. This is particularly for hard copy paper records, and that they're sequential, that we haven't got days missing, or they're in order. You haven't got like May before June or upside down, or a few pages from Christmas turning up in Easter. If this that would cause CQC to have some concerns that the records aren't being treated with enough respect, they're not being looked after properly, people aren't taking enough time and trouble over them. So it goes towards their presumption of the quality of the care that you're providing. You can see that really because it's to CQC, it's the sort of one of the most obvious things to look for is how well do they record things. So you could be giving the loveliest care in the world, but if you're not recording it very well, then you've not got really evidence of what you've done and that you've done a good job. So do bear that in mind when you're writing them, and don't sort of think, oh, well, I'm a bit short of time today, I'll just do a sloppy couple of lines, because it could come back and bite you in the bum, I can assure you. I think most of us who've worked in the field, be it nursing or health and social care for a long time, have all been caught out a little bit by that one, where they've rushed something and left something out, which turned out to be quite important. So do bear that in mind. Okay, let's look at some of the types of records. I mean, we've got some simple records like messages, notes that you sent to each other. You used to use a lot of post-it notes. Now we tend to text things. If people are working, especially in a big service where they're on different places, they might use their phones to text, or nowadays they might use electronic tablets to put information in. They certainly do in hospitals very often. Things like ward diaries, which clocks the actual things that happen. If someone's got an appointment, Mrs. Jones has got an appointment with the physio or with the dentist or the chiropodist on Wednesday the 10th at 11 o'clock, then that should all be in a diary somewhere so that people know what's happening. Process notes, so that's often when like psychology teams come in and maybe do some work. They often keep their own notes. Remember the stuff about multidisciplinary teams and that. They often keep their own notes, but they should also be writing something in your notes as well. Either that, or they write their own notes and leave a copy in the right place on the right date. And sometimes you have to sort of encourage them to do that because maybe they're not always that good at that. So the other types of records are your just general day-to-day clinical notes and your care plans and your care plan reviews. Or it could be electronic records if your care home has moved to the electronic system. A lot of people find these a lot easier because they don't get messed up and they don't they don't get tired and the ink doesn't fade and you don't lose a couple of sheets here and there when the ring binder breaks and things. So electronic records can be very good, but sometimes people say they feel that they take more time to do because you've got to get to a computer, log on and do that, whereas with the other ones you could just grab a file and sort of go into a corner and sort of write a note quickly. Emails on your work email are records, and sometimes, depending on whether they're about a service user, if they're about a service user, they need to be kept. Okay, so you need to file them. Um, you need to have a sort of tidy organization within your inbox to file things. Letters to and from other health professionals often go into people's notes. Electronically, hopefully, they can be scanned and copied in. Otherwise, they'll just get filed in a paper note. So if you've a letter from a consultant, if one of your service users has been to hospital, had a particular investigation, the consultant letters are really, really important, and they will be there. Any lab reports, X-rays, blood test results, those sorts of things are all kept in their records. And again, um, if you're lucky, they may come electronically from the hospital now, and you can be able to upload them into your electronic records. If not, you have to print and scan copies and things. Printouts from monitoring equipment, like ECGs, incident reports and statements. If anything happens, unusual events happen that needs a specific incident report, somebody has a fall or an accident, they will need to go in the right date. Any photographs or videos or conversations that might have been taped, with family for a particular reason, or maybe a review meeting that might have been videoed, those sorts of things. They should all be kept somewhere. And again, if you've got electronic records, of course, it's a lot easier to upload photographs, videos, etc. It's a lot harder if you've got just paper files, but people put them in plastic bags at the back. If they have to put them onto little sort of thumb drives and things very often. Or if they're photographs, they print them out. Obviously. So it can be a bit more difficult for that way, and that's why electronic records is the way a lot of places are moving towards, because it's just a lot easier, and they don't get lost in that same way once you've uploaded them. Of course, you can still make mistakes with them, but they tend to be easier to sort of find and move around if you have put them in the wrong place. But they still need for you to pay lots of attention to what you're doing and making sure you are putting things in the right place. So, regardless of whatever format you're using, your records is about protecting the welfare of the client. It's a positive thing, the records. They are there for the person's welfare. They should reflect high standards of care, and they should promote high standards of care, which is why they should be written well and not written in silly language or the silly acronyms that we talked about. They also promote continuity, so something should be written most days on somebody. So if CQC come along and they pick out Mrs. Jones's file and no one's written anything about her for 3 weeks and she's been sitting there, then they'll want to know why, and fair enough, really. It also helps with communication between the rest of the interprofessional team, especially those who might just come and go. That's really important for them. They could log in or pick up the file and have a quick look and see what's been going on over the last few days. Then they can contribute their piece to it. So you get a lovely holistic picture. It needs to be accurate, and it needs to be an accurate account of any sort of treatment, any change in the care plan, and how that care plan's being delivered. There should also be risk assessments as part of your assessment, and then reviews of those risk assessments so that you can identify any problems coming out of it, and then you will write about it and see. You will also write about what you're doing about those problems. It needs to reflect confidentiality. So they need to be stored safely so that any Tom, Dick, and Harry can't just walk in and pick them up and read, anything about Mrs. Jones or Mrs. Brown. The last thing you want is the care home cook, to be able to come in and read about them. Obviously, if it's about menus and that will be given to her separately. But otherwise, they shouldn't be able to read about people's medical details and that. So or the builders who come in to clean the windows shouldn't be able to pick up things and start reading people's care plans and that. So confidentiality needs to be maintained. We've talked about that in other units, and we will carry on talking about that in other units as well. So overall, it should be a reflection of the quality of care provided, and it should be a positive reflection. Okay, and if it isn't looking very positive, then you need to do something about it. You need to improve the quality of care, and you need to improve the quality of recording. Okay, because remember, as I said, when CQC come in to do their inspection, it's one of the sort of places that they will go. So when you're making records, you need to ensure if it's a handwritten record and there are still odd notes, the stuff that goes in the diary, you need to write it legibly. It sort of sounds a bit obvious, really, but it's amazing how many people think that everyone can read their writing and they can't. So you need to be thinking about the way you write, and if you have that sort of joined up writing that really is hard to read, you might need to print. Okay, so write things out in a much simpler way. You need to write in a dark pen so it doesn't fade and it's clear. When you are writing, you need to stick to the facts. You don't need to put your opinions in. You just need to say what happened, what you did, what you provided, what the effect was. You can say what Mrs. Bloggs said, but you need to sort of not make assumptions about Mrs. Roxburgh. So you can only report what she actually said to you. You need to use non-judgmental language. Don't say Mrs. Bloggs was a pain this morning. She just wouldn't get out of bed. She wasn't cooperating. Now that's a phrase I've seen, and really taken people to task over it, because it's an incredibly judgmental phrase, and people think it's not offensive. Well, it is. Okay, so you'll have someone might write, Mrs. Jones was not very cooperative last night. She wouldn't go to bed when I asked her. Well, she doesn't actually have to cooperate with you, really. If she doesn't want to go to bed at a certain time, actually she's got the right not to do that. So, just because you wanted your routine to go that way that night, it isn't the fact that Mrs. Bloggs needs to. So just think about when you're using that sort of phrase, and maybe try not to use it, because it is very judgmental. It's like, she's not very good because she didn't do what I wanted her to. And that is not what people want to read. Okay, just be aware of that. Your records need to be quite specific. You need to use, as I said, you need to use neutral language as well that doesn't show your opinion, because we don't want to know your opinion. We just want to know what happened. Okay. Remember the fact, everything you read, remember, it's a good one to say. I've always said it to many students. Keep it in mind that if a judge read it, what would he think of you? Okay. So be very conscious. If you're a bit unsure, check it out with a friend. It's always good to discuss it with a colleague. Is this language a bit, have I gone too far with my language? Keep the record intact. Make sure it's complete. So don't get distracted when you're halfway through writing something and then come off and not finish it, because it will look weird and people want to know, why didn't you finish it? And, were you hiding something? Were you up to something? Because it looks strange. Use verbs to denote an action. Here's some examples. Mrs. Jones read the paper today. Mrs. Jones stood without assistance. There is some suppuration at the injection site. That suppuration is where there's some leakage. Okay. So be quite specific, and try to, use your verbs. Use adjectives to give more information about the noun. So Mrs. Blogg's sputum is green, So she's got some sputum, she's coughing up some sputum, and you're giving it another adjective. There's nothing wrong with that. If it looks green, say so, okay? But you can use those adjectives to give a stronger picture. When possible, provide a measure of a period of time. Mrs. Jones was crying for about half an hour this morning after she spoke to her family on the phone. Factual, gives a good measure. You can see that she was distressed for a while because she cried for about half an hour. So then you would say, so I went to speak to her to see if there's any help that we could give her. She asked for a cup of tea. I sat and chatted with her for a while, give a gist of the conversation, that sort of thing. Okay. You always substantiate your record with an example. So if you're saying, I heard, I felt, I saw, So a favourite word is on seeing Mrs. Jones this morning, I observed that her skin was pale and clammy. She she was shivery. She looked like she was in pain. You can say she looked like she was in pain, but it's always good to check it out. Why did she look like she was in pain? Maybe say because she was scrunching up her face and became very sensitive. She had a red sore area which she kept touching. Try to qualify it, really. Okay. When you're actually saying what someone said to you, make it clear that this is what they said. So Mrs. Jones stated, Mrs. Jones said to me, I don't feel very well today. Oh, my leg is very painful. um, I've got here uses the terms alleges, which is a legal term, but um, it's not really one we use so much in care. It's much simpler just to say she said. No. um, you can say she alleges to be feeling unwell, but I mean, I've said she felt unwell, and that's quite good enough, really. There are only accepted abbreviations. I mean, I always say to people, try to avoid them completely. But we've got some things like CVAs for cerebral vascular accident. There's only a few things, really. But if your organization allows a certain amount of abbreviations, I mean, there are medication abbreviations like TDS, QDS, take 4 times a day, take 3 times a day. You can actually mention that because most people know it. But really, if your organization, if there are abbreviations you've agreed on using, they should actually have them written down in the policy, and they should update their recording policy to mention any abbreviations they've added. If they've had an MRI scan, you could say that. What you might do is if you're writing it out for the first time, you put magnetic resonance imaging and then in brackets MRI, and then you could use MRI after that. Each entry must demonstrate patient and carer engagement. So every time you write something about Mrs. Jones or Mrs. Bloggs, you have to show what your engagement was. So it needs to be an action, even if it was you were sitting down chatting with them, discussed with she agreed to do sports decision. She's happy with our suggestion to refer to a physio. Show that there's been an interaction. You need to keep a clear and accurate record of discussions that you have had, and particularly about any treatment. So if you've done any interventions, such as changing someone's dressing on a wound, that absolutely has to be recorded at the right time, because we might need to go back and check when was that dressing changed, especially if something goes wrong and someone gets a lot sicker. You need to show, well, are we changing the dressings enough? Yes, I changed it Monday morning. So that needs to be very clearly documented. And this receipts to all care delivered by any members of the team. So if you have some part-timers who come in from outside who just do certain things, if you have someone who does, a bit of art therapy or a bit of music therapy, and they come in and take a small group, they will need to write up on that small group. They need to pop something down in the care record to say, I did this session, this is sort of what happened, and just make a mention about each person. Some practitioners record too much, others too little. This is true. Practice is really the only way. The more records you write, the better you get at them. Being too brief and concise might mean that you're oversimplifying and leaving out some things that are important. So what you need to decide is what's relevant. Now, a lot of people, especially when they're new students, tend to write too much. They're more prone to writing too much than too little. And you're going to have to learn to pick out what is relevant. And what you can do is you can do some practice stuff with your mentor or your supervisor. Say, you can actually write it out first and say, I've done this as a write up for Mrs. Jones, who I've been allocated with this morning. Can you have a look at it and tell me, if you've written a page, then you've written too much. If it was only just a normal day and nothing major happened. So you're going to have to do that by practice, but it's really you look at your lines afterwards and just say, is that relevant or is that detail that wasn't necessary? Do I need to talk about the colour of the dress she put on, or do we just need to know that I helped her put her dress on, I helped her choose, and she made a choice about the dress. So this is all about learning those skills of summary and paraphrasing, pulling things together really instead of writing too much. And I do know a lot of students, especially in their early days when they're just starting to write things, they do tend to practice it first before they actually put it into the document, or before they sign it off. It's a bit easier with electronic ones because you can write it, someone can look at it and go, no, that's too much, you can edit it out. But sometimes people used to practice it, write it up a bit on a piece of paper and say, have I written too much? Yeah, no, let's and it became quite a good supervision sort of session. So don't worry about that. You will do that at the beginning. You'll panic and write too much. Eventually, sometimes your managers will go, okay, we'll just leave it there. And sometimes will say, no, we can, this is what we can do for the next session. And if someone really struggles with that, then there are little training courses that you can do to actually work on the practical side a little bit more. I mean, often a lot of organizations do that for their newer staff anyway, or sort of less experienced staff. Remember the thing though, critical, negative, personal feelings should never be displayed in the record. You may hate that service user, but please don't write it in the record. It's really important that you show an objective view. And your personal feelings need to be very clearly separated from your professional judgments. And a professional judgment is validated by either the evidence that you've described or as to why you come to that judgment. If you don't have any evidence for it, then it's a personal feeling generally. Okay, so do remember that. If you're not sure, before you write it, chat to someone more senior or more experienced. Okay, before you write it down, because there are issues. What we can't have, particularly with handwritten notes, is you can't have people going back and crossing things out on a regular basis. You are allowed to cross things out. It's not you're not supposed to make a habit of it, and it really doesn't look good if you do it regularly, as you can imagine. So you're a lot better taking your time first to make sure you know what you're writing. Inclusive writing, again, think about value-laden language. Thing here like Latin temperament. Well, I don't know what that means. Low pain threshold. That's a stereotype, really. That Latin people lose their temper easily, or get excitable easily. You can't write things like that. It's got no meaning. Okay. Definitional questions in the terms of sort of low ability, neglect. What might be neglect for you might be just a little bit scatty for somebody else. So because you think somebody's house is untidy, they might not. And I know that can be difficult, but what you need to do is describe what you see, and then everyone will come to a conclusion, really. So you need to qualify what you mean. Don't label people, because it's so easy to lean towards a stereotype. Avoid the word appears. we used to write appears quite a lot. She appears distressed. She appears unhappy. That again is open to interpretation. It's best to check it out with the person. Ask them how they feel. If someone's sobbing their heart out, you don't need to say appears upset. You need to say the person is crying. I spoke to her about what the problem was, and she said it was this, or she said she didn't know. She just felt very sad today. There you are. You've got it clearly. Yeah, another word to avoid is presents. Doctors use this all the time. Mrs. Jones presents with a, and you go, wow, that's ridiculous. It's like they've come along and brought, their kidney separately. Here's my kidney, I'm presenting it to you. And it also can mean that someone is, as I've said here, putting on a front to confuse or to mislead you. Presenting is a word that means sort of people don't always trust, really. Again, it's just best to say what you observe and what she says. Summarizing is really important, and as I said, it will be a skill that you need to develop, where you make sure you get the right stuff in, but you cut it down and keep it succinct. Sometimes people do little summaries like once a month, or if they've got very complex cases, they might do a monthly summary or even a weekly one if it's a fast moving case, to ensure other practitioners can get to it. But you just need to make sure it's headed up as a weekly summary where you bring some of the important things together. It's quite helpful if someone's going to be with you for a long time and you need to do reviews, because it means instead of people having to read every single day, they can just read a summary. It really depends if that's something your organization likes doing. Okay. But those summaries can be very helpful to pick out if you have to do it for like big case reviews or a court report if somebody dies. Um, and it's quite good for a new practitioner, if they're going to familiarise themselves. If Mrs. Bloggs has been living with you for 15 years, and they want to sort of find out a little bit about her, and you do a case summary every month or every couple of weeks, that really helps people, as long as everything's accurate. So amending notes. Can we amend notes? Yes, we can. Yes, we can. But there are things that we can't do, and we can only do it in a certain way. There's the CIA mnemonic: clear, intelligible, and accurate, and that's a professional requirement. It's in the code of conduct. The elbow rule is very helpful. No erasures, which means you cannot take a rubber to anything and remove it. Once you've put it down in a record, it's a record. Think about that, especially when you're doing electronic records. You can't really go back. In fact, the system might not let you. You can't go back and try to erase something from 3 days ago. Hopefully, they've got a good enough system that they won't let you do it. If you're using hard copies, you cannot take pages out, or it's highly disapproved of because they never go back in the right place. So better you carry the whole case record. You cannot leave blank spaces. You can't say, oh, I'm going to leave a blank space there because I want to go and write a bit more about it, but I'm really busy now. I've got to go off and do lunches. And then I'm off tomorrow. So I'll come back and finish it off. No, don't do that. Blank spaces cause suspicion. CQC really do not like them. Judges hate them because they don't know what you're up to. You cannot overwrite. Try to change letters, because again, that looks like you're up to no good. And we don't really encourage writing in margins. Margins are for dates and signatures very often, so we try not to, although I am aware that people have done please see extra records, sometimes as a use. You can make an amendment to a record. This is particularly in handwritten records. You can make an amendment. As you can see, I've got 3 colour inks you're allowed to make amendments in. So what you can do is you can cross. So if you've written something and thought, oh my God, I've just written, the last 2 lines are completely wrong, you can cross them through the single line. Do not scribble them out so that what you wrote cannot be read, even if it's mad or gobbledygook. It's important that it can be read. So just put a single line through it, date and sign it to say that you crossed it out. So in case someone wants to come and ask you about it. And then write the correct entry in red underneath, date and sign that. Okay. If you really have to go back, and I've never really seen it, but I am aware of it, you can go back. If you have to put a second amendment in the same same report, then it goes into green ink, and if a third amendment is purple, and quite honestly, if you have to do a fourth amendment, I would suggest you just write a different entry and say, with regard to the stuff above, I got it all wrong. But I've never known it. I have known amendments in red quite often. So cross it out with a single line. Do not scribble it out. Again, in a court of law, they want to see everything you've written, even if you've written it wrong. Okay. The other important thing is about signing it with your name, preferably so that someone can actually read it, and dating the time of entry. That's really important. Now, the electronic systems will allow you to do things in a better way, and it will show you. And you can go back and put an amendment, and they usually come up as an amendment box. It depends on which system you're using. They'll often even highlight themselves in red, or they'll put, you can highlight it and say, this is a bit I have to amend, and they'll put a sort of magic line through it anyway. So electronic systems are quite good for making amendments, as you can imagine. Okay. It's very important to remind you that poor record keeping can result in legal action. It's important to be aware of it. And as I've said, these professional records, when they actually physically turn up and get handed to a judge, especially if they're handwritten ones, judges hate handwritten records, but there you go. With electronic records, they're either sent to the judge or they can be printed for them. But things, such as scruffy handwriting, deletions that, leave the original entries obscured, like I said, they don't like that, and they see it, they look at that in a very negative light. If someone's taken the dreaded Tipp-Ex to them, you will be in trouble for that. You do not Tipp-Ex things. It's the same as erasing, really. Because obviously once we write in ink, you can't. Often rubbers don't work, so a lot of people take out the Tipp-Ex pot. Please do not do that. Put a line through it and rewrite it, like I said. If there's lots of stuff Tipp-Ex, a judge will really go into everything that's there and would expect you to explain every single piece of Tipp-Ex that you've put into there, and they don't like it at all. So, what sort of hearings can records be used? Just so as you're aware. Civil court hearings, it could be the family suing the care home for what they call not quality treatment, or not looking after somebody well enough. It could be a criminal court hearing, especially if the person's died or taken a turn for the worst or been abused. They will be used. It could be a disciplinary hearing for you or maybe another member of staff that worked with you. It could be a fitness to practice hearing. So if you're a care professional and there's some concern over your fitness to practice, they will pull up some of the records that you've done. Say, are they doing things properly? It could be a complaints investigation via CQC. Someone else has complained, or CQC are unhappy. Could be a Secretary of State inquiries. That's pretty serious in the UK if it goes right up to the health minister. But there are some people who won't give in until it's gone to the health minister. Some families and that who feel very concerned. So it can happen. And that will be an inquiry. It's a bit like a court of law. There isn't a judge there, but there are a lot of MPs and committee members and that, and it's quite, it's quite a serious and uncomfortable situation. Could be a police investigation, and they might want to take the records away. There's rules about that, but they know what it is. Could be a coroner's inquest. Again, if someone's died suddenly, a coroner will do an inquest. You've seen all these things on TV, and in films, so you know how it goes. So just remember that could be your records as well. I don't want to terrify you, but you do need to be aware of the gravity of the situation. So any document or any other evidence can be required to produce in court if it's relevant, and definitely your case notes are relevant. So anything that's hearsay won't prove any truth. So remember that. That's what I'm saying about being accurate, making sure things are properly reported. Those who wrote the records will normally be required to give evidence to substantiate what's written. So you're not going to get away with just hand over your records and stay at home. No, no, they're probably going to want you to go there. And if they say, well, actually, it's the day of Tuesday, the 15th of May, that we're really concerned about, and we need to look at the records in particular detail for that day, and you were the person who was the key worker who was on shift who wrote the care review, the care records, then it will be, they'll say, right, we want you sat outside so that the judge or the prosecutor can call you in and ask you questions about that record. Yes, your manager can go with you, but in the end you will answer for yourself. She will not be able to speak on your behalf. So just be aware of that. So, to conclude, healthcare professionals have a shared responsibility to ensure the correct process and legislation is followed. So, the outcome of poor record keeping can be really detrimental. Be detrimental for you in your job, but also if you write poor records, a mishap can happen to your service user. At the very least, you could not be delivering the best quality of care. At the very worst, something serious could go wrong. This is a Nursing and Midwifery Council, a part of their code of conduct. Good record keeping, integral part of nursing and midwifery practice, essential to the provision of safe and effective care. It is not an optional extra to be fitted in if circumstances allow. Therefore, when you work in a care home or work in domiciliary care, your manager has to make sure that you have time to do that documentation. And if you do not, then you need to raise it as an issue, because it is not, as you see here, an optional extra. So you can't just write good records when you've got time. Okay, so do remember that. And if you are concerned about it, you do need to raise it with your seniors. Few references there, things you can look up. Some homework for you as well. Okay. In extra reading, I've put some additional notes, which is basically the NHS benchmark. So something for you to just go through. It's sort of consolidates some of the things I've said, but just a review of it really, with a bit more detail about what they consider to be a good standard. I've added a record keeping worksheet to consolidate your learning. So instead of doing a quiz this week, you've got a worksheet where you just fill in sort of your answer views. You don't have to hand it in, but if you struggle with any of the questions, or if you think you're not getting them right, you can WhatsApp me if you want to discuss any of the questions. You should be able to answer them just by checking back here at some of the slides and any extra reading notes. You really should be able to answer them all. But if you do struggle, please don't forget to talk to me. And you'll see that there's a list. There's also a document with 4 case studies in it. And this is really for answering criteria 2.3 in the assignment. I've just given them to you ahead of time so you can start giving some thought to it. 2.3 is you have to produce a written communication that is appropriate for your organisational role. So what I'd like you to do is just to write a day's care record. So you can, you can date it again as like Tuesday, the 15th of May or something like that. And then you can write your care record, taking into mind all some of the things that we've discussed here. What I've done is I've given you 4 case studies so you can base your care record on those people, just to give you a little bit of background so you're not making it up from complete scratch. What I'm really concerned about is your language and the way you report things. So just have a look at it. You might want to have a look, those of you who are working in care home practice, just have a look at the way maybe some of your more experienced people have laid it out. And then give me, as part of the assignment, you need to write a page on that. I mean, it tells you how many words. So we'll be looking at that towards the end of the month. But I just want you to just get some ideas and think about it. There's 4 case studies. So 4 people you can use to be your allocated person that you're just reporting at the end of his shift. Okay, and there's a few activities that they've done in it just to give you an idea of things you could write about. Okay, again, if you have a look at the case studies and you're not quite sure what I'm on about, then again, WhatsApp me and I'm happy to explain it. And I'll probably share the answer to the whole group, if you don't mind, just in case somebody else is going to ask me the same question. Okay, so that's it for this week on recording. Okay, and I'll see you for next week. Okay, bye.